In the bustling heart of Athens, more than 2,000 years ago, a philosopher sat down to write words that would ripple endlessly through history. His name was Plato, student of Socrates and teacher of Aristotle, one of the most influential thinkers the Western world has ever known. Plato's writings touched on politics, virtue, and the very nature of reality itself. Yet, among his many works lies a tale that seems almost out of place, a story not of abstract philosophy, but of a mysterious land, a vanished empire known as Atlantis. Plato introduces Atlantis in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. These were not myths told for entertainment, nor mere fables for children, but philosophical texts intended for learned men of the academy. And yet, nestled within discussions of the cosmos and human society, he spoke of a vast island civilization that had risen in power long before the time of classical Greece. According to Plato, this story did not begin with him. He claimed it was passed down through generations, from the Athenian lawgiver Solon, who had travelled to Egypt some centuries earlier. In the temple of Sais, Solon was said to have conversed with Egyptian priests, men who guarded records far older than anything written in Greece. There, they told him of a land that once existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, known to us as the Strait of Gibraltar. This land, they said, had been larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. It was home to a people of remarkable wealth and knowledge, the Atlanteans. Plato wrote that these people were not only masters of their own island, but also rulers of lands far and wide. Their empire stretched across the seas, touching Europe and Africa, commanding great armies and fleets. They were a civilization of power, one that seemed to rival the very gods in ambition. Yet what made Plato's account different from the countless myths of his time was the detail. He described the city of Atlantis not as an abstract vision, but as a place of order and engineering. He spoke of concentric circles of land and water, a design both functional and beautiful. Canals crossed the city, bridges linked the rings. At the center rose a grand palace and a temple to Poseidon, glittering with precious metals and ornamented with carvings of seahorses and gods. It was a vision of urban planning that felt strangely modern, as if it belonged to a future not yet reached, rather than a past long forgotten. And yet, Plato did not present Atlantis as a utopia untouched by flaw. In his telling, the Atlanteans began noble, but their character declined with time. Their thirst for conquest grew, their arrogance spread, and their harmony with the divine order faltered. At last, in a single night of cataclysm, earthquakes and floods consumed the island, pulling it into the depths of the sea. All that remained was the memory preserved in Egyptian records, passed to Solon, and finally written down by Plato himself. For Plato, this story may have served as more than a history. Some scholars believe it was an allegory, a warning about hubris, about the dangers of pride and unchecked power. To others, it was simply a parable dressed as history, a cautionary tale to illustrate his philosophical arguments. Yet, there have always been those who wondered, what if he was recording a memory of something real? What if Atlantis had truly existed, its greatness lost not only to disaster, but to time and ice? Thus, From a philosopher's pen in ancient Athens, the legend of Atlantis was born. Whether myth or memory, fable or fact, it became a seed of mystery planted deep in the imagination of humankind. And for more than 2 millennia, that seed has continued to grow, leading explorers, dreamers, and seekers to search for the lost land across the seas, and perhaps far beneath the frozen silence of Antarctica. When we think of Atlantis as Plato described it, we must try to imagine not just a city, but a vision of civilization at its height. His words conjure an island empire, both majestic and carefully designed, as though its builders carried knowledge beyond their time. To picture it is to see a city carved from both stone and imagination, a place where art, architecture, and engineering blended into harmony. Plato tells us that Atlantis was arranged in concentric circles, alternating rings of land and water. The great capital stood at the island's center, linked by bridges that crossed the waterways, guarded by gates of bronze, and lined with docks that welcomed fleets of ships. From above, it might have appeared like a vast mandala of stone and sea, a symbol as much as a settlement. The outer ring was broad farmland, fertile and rich, sustaining the people with harvests. Inside lay dwellings, homes of artisans, markets, and workshops. Closer to the center, noble houses and gardens circled in ordered fashion. And at the very heart, the crown of Atlantis, a mighty palace and the temple of Poseidon, the god whom the Atlanteans revered as their divine protector. The temple itself was said to be clad in silver and gold, its roof adorned with ivory, its walls inlaid with precious metals that glimmered in the sun. Statues of gods and heroes decorated its halls. At its center stood a towering figure of Poseidon, guiding his horses across the waves. This was no simple shrine. It was a statement, a reminder that the Atlanteans saw themselves as chosen by the sea, as masters of its power and its bounty. The empire stretched far beyond the city. The Atlanteans commanded not only their island, but territories across the ocean. Their navy was formidable, their armies disciplined, their influence vast. They traded metals, crafted intricate tools, and may have known secrets of navigation that gave them command of the waters long before others dared sail them. Their wealth, drawn from fertile soil and mineral-rich mountains, seemed inexhaustible. But it was not only material strength that set them apart. Plato hints at knowledge of geometry, of architecture, of laws and governance that gave structure to their society. Roads, canals, and irrigation bound their land together. Bridges spanned the watery rings, demonstrating engineering skills that would not appear elsewhere for many centuries. To the Greeks who heard Plato's words, this was a city that seemed almost impossible, a glimpse of what human hands could create when guided by divine favor. For generations, such descriptions have inspired dreamers to imagine Atlantis not only as a place of wealth, but as a model of harmony between nature, engineering, and spirit. A city built in circles surrounded by the sea, watched over by temples that touched the heavens. This was Plato's shining island empire. And yet, as dazzling as it was, Plato reminds us that all brightness can cast a shadow. For every triumph of Atlantis, pride began to creep in. For every achievement, the hunger for more took root. Their empire, so carefully built, would one day crumble. Not from lack of brilliance, but from the very excess that brilliance encouraged. Still, in our minds, the shining image remains, an island of circles and canals, a jewel upon the sea, a city that even in ruin continues to shimmer in imagination. Whether fact or allegory, it lives on as one of the most radiant visions of a lost world ever spoken. Every great empire carries within it the seeds of its own decline. The story of Atlantis, as Plato told it, was not only about triumph and brilliance, but also about the slow erosion of character. The Atlanteans began as a noble people, favored by the gods, living in balance with nature and guided by wisdom. Yet over time, their virtues began to fade, and ambition crept into their hearts. Plato writes that the kings of Atlantis, descended from Poseidon himself, once ruled with fairness and unity. The laws they followed were sacred, inscribed upon a pillar of orichalcum, a mythical metal said to gleam like fire. These laws bound the rulers to justice and humility. But as wealth grew and power expanded, the Atlanteans became restless. The riches of their land no longer satisfied them. Their fleets, once tools of trade, turned into instruments of conquest. They began to extend their reach, spreading across neighboring lands. Their armies marched into Europe. Their ships crossed into Africa. At first, they sought allies and resources, but soon their ambition darkened into domination. They demanded tribute, seized territories, and challenged free peoples. What had once been an enlightened society began to resemble a hungry empire, consuming more than it gave. The gods, according to Plato, watched with dismay, for the Atlanteans were no longer living in harmony with the divine order. Their pride grew too large, their sense of invincibility too strong. They believed no one could resist them. It was at this moment, Plato says, that Atlantis turned its gaze toward Athens itself. The Athenians, though smaller and less wealthy, resisted. They fought bravely against the Atlantean expansion, and in Plato's tale, it was Athens that prevailed. The Atlanteans, for all their power, were defeated by the courage of a free people defending their land. For Plato's audience, this was not just history. It was a moral lesson, a warning that no empire, no matter how brilliant, could endure once arrogance replaced wisdom. But the defeat at Athens was not the end. In fact, it was only the beginning of Atlantis' true downfall. Pride had drawn them into war, but their punishment would be far greater. The gods, angered by their corruption, sent disasters upon them. The earth shook, storms rose, seas swallowed their once great city, and in a single day and night, the shining empire of Atlantis disappeared beneath the waves. Whether real or allegorical, the message was clear. Greatness is fragile. When the balance between wisdom and power is lost, destruction often follows. For generations, thinkers have seen in Plato's account not only the story of a lost island, but a parable for every empire that rises too high. Pride, unchecked, leads inevitably to the fall. And yet, while the downfall of Atlantis may have been swift and merciless, its legend did not sink with it. The tale endured, carried through centuries, inspiring countless seekers of truth and dreamers of lost worlds. Pride may have destroyed Atlantis, but the memory of its brilliance remained, glimmering like a beacon through time. In the ancient world, it was believed that the rise and fall of nations was not only the result of human choices, but also of divine will. To Plato, Atlantis was not simply destroyed by chance, nor undone by natural disaster alone. Its fall was the judgment of the gods, a punishment for arrogance, and a reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, could stand against the eternal order of the cosmos. Plato describes a council of gods who gathered to deliberate over Atlantis. At their center was Zeus, father of gods and men, ruler of Olympus. He observed how the Atlanteans, once noble children of Poseidon, had allowed greed and ambition to corrupt their hearts. They had turned from humility to arrogance, from balance to excess. They were no longer stewards of divine gifts, but abusers of them. Zeus, therefore, prepared to act. What followed was not an ordinary reckoning, but a cosmic punishment. The Atlanteans, in their pride, had believed themselves beyond defeat. Yet, in a single moment, their fate was sealed. Plato tells us that earthquakes shook the land with violent force. Storms raged across the seas, fires burst forth, and then came the final blow. The waters themselves rose up, swallowing the city and its people. It happened swiftly. In a single day and night of misfortune, the great island was gone. Ships, temples, markets, palaces, farms, everything that had stood for centuries was buried beneath the ocean's waves. What had seemed indestructible was erased almost at once, leaving only silence where life had thrived. To the Greeks who first heard this tale, the meaning was clear. The gods could bless, but they could also take away. Human greatness was fragile, built not only on stone and gold, but on virtue and balance. Once those virtues were abandoned, destruction became inevitable. Yet, behind the story of divine punishment, there may have been another truth. Perhaps Plato was describing a natural catastrophe, a volcanic eruption, a tsunami, a shift of the earth itself, events that ancient peoples often interpreted as the anger of gods. Modern scholars have suggested that real disasters, remembered through oral tradition, could have been woven into Plato's story. Flood myths, after all, appear across cultures, often tied to memories of real catastrophes. But for Plato, the allegory mattered more than the science. The fall of Atlantis was not just the drowning of a city. It was the drowning of arrogance, a cosmic rebalancing of order. The gods, in his account, acted as guardians of justice, showing that no empire could rise too high without consequences. And so, Atlantis became the ultimate cautionary tale. Its destruction was not simply a tragedy, but a lesson that even the greatest power must remain humble before the order of the universe. Whether we see it as myth, memory, or moral parable, the judgment of the gods over Atlantis continues to echo. It reminds us that pride has always carried a price, and that sometimes the very heavens themselves deliver the final blow. Atlantis, if it truly vanished in a single night of catastrophe, should have been forgotten like countless other lost towns and kingdoms. Entire peoples have risen and fallen across history, leaving behind little more than scattered ruins or broken shards of pottery. Yet the story of Atlantis did not fade. It lived on in Plato's words, and through those words it has echoed across centuries, reaching into every age with renewed mystery. For the Greeks of Plato's time, the tale was a lesson. They saw in Atlantis a warning about the dangers of pride and unchecked ambition, a parable about how even the mightiest power could be swept away. To them, it was not only a story of a vanished land, but a mirror for their own society, reflecting the constant tension between greatness and corruption. The Athenians could look at Atlantis and see both the glory they sought and the downfall they feared. As centuries passed, the Roman world absorbed Greek thought, and with it, the whispers of Atlantis. Philosophers and historians repeated Plato's account, debating whether it was allegory or history. Some dismissed it entirely. Others held on to the possibility that it was a memory of a real event. Slowly, the name Atlantis became shorthand for a golden age lost to time. The Middle Ages, with their focus on faith and scripture, paid less attention to Plato's island. But even then, echoes remained. Sailors told stories of islands beyond the horizon, and poets dreamed of hidden lands filled with wonders. When maps were still drawn with blank spaces and monsters at the edges, Atlantis remained a possibility, an enigma lurking just out of reach. The age of exploration gave the legend new life. As Europeans crossed oceans and discovered new continents, some believed they had found the remains of Atlantis in the Caribbean or the Americas. The grandeur of the Aztec and Maya cities, the pyramids of the Andes, the complexity of cultures long unknown to Europe, all seem to suggest that an ancient, advanced people had once shaped the world. In their eyes, these marvels might be the children of Atlantis. By the Enlightenment and beyond, Atlantis had become more than history or myth. It was an idea, a symbol of lost wisdom and forgotten achievement. Writers and philosophers used it to reflect on the fragility of human progress. Poets filled it with longing. Scientists searched for geological explanations. Explorers dreamed of finding its ruins. Even in modern times, from novels to films, from speculative theories to serious scholarship, Atlantis continues to hold its place in the imagination. The echo of Atlantis is powerful, not because we know it existed, but because we do not. Its absence, its mystery, creates space for wonder. A vanished empire beneath the sea, a shining city swallowed by waves. Such images stir something timeless within us. They remind us that the world is vast, that the past holds secrets, and that perhaps not all of them have been revealed. Thus, even if Atlantis is only a story, it has achieved a kind of immortality. Long after the empires of Greece and Rome have themselves fallen, long after their stones have crumbled, the name of Atlantis still lives. It is the echo of a legend, one that has outlived the empire it describes, and one that continues to inspire seekers, dreamers, and storytellers to this very day. At the very bottom of our world lies a land so vast and desolate that it seems almost like another planet. Antarctica, the southernmost continent, is a place of silence and extremes. It stretches wider than Europe, yet remains almost entirely hidden beneath an ice sheet that in some places is more than 2 miles thick. To stand upon its surface is to feel the weight of deep time, a stillness broken only by the howling of wind and the distant cracking of ice. For much of human history, Antarctica was unknown. Ancient maps spoke vaguely of a terra australis, a great southern land thought to balance the continents of the north. But these were guesses, products of imagination rather than direct knowledge. The reality of Antarctica remained concealed until the early 19th century, when explorers finally reached its icy coasts. Even then, its vast interior was untouchable, locked away behind walls of snow and cold that few could endure. And yet, Antarctica holds secrets. Beneath its ice, mountains rise as high as the Alps. Valleys stretch for hundreds of miles. Lakes, sealed away for millions of years, remain liquid in the warmth of Earth's inner heat. Scientists drilling through the ice have found signs of life in these hidden waters, tiny organisms that have survived in darkness, isolated from the rest of the world. This frozen continent is not as empty as it appears. It is a vault of mysteries, sealed under ice and silence. The sheer remoteness of Antarctica gives it an aura of timelessness. Unlike Europe, Asia, or Africa, its history is not filled with human settlement, conquests, or empires. Instead, its story is written in ice layers and fossils, in rock formations and shifting glaciers. Each sheet of ice is like a page, recording the planet's climate over millions of years. When scientists extract cores of this ice, they are, in effect, reading the Earth's diary. But what if Antarctica's silence hides more than just natural history? What if, beneath the miles of frozen crust, lie the remains of a civilization, perhaps one as advanced as Plato's Atlantis? For most, the idea sounds impossible, yet the thought persists, fueled by strange clues and unanswered questions. How could some ancient maps appear to show parts of Antarctica's coastline centuries before modern discovery? Could there have been a time, far in the distant past, when this frozen continent was warm and habitable? And if so, could it have been home to people whose memory survives only in myths? Antarctica is unlike any other continent. No cities rise upon its surface. No nations claim it as their own. It exists as a world apart, governed not by politics, but by treaties of science and peace. Perhaps this too adds to its mystery. A land untouched, untamed, and still largely unknown. A land where the silence itself seems to suggest that something is waiting, preserved beneath the eternal ice. In its silence, Antarctica invites both science and imagination. Scientists seek data, measurements, and truths hidden in stone and snow. Dreamers, however, hear something else in that silence. The faint echo of stories long forgotten, perhaps even the whisper of Atlantis beneath the frozen wastes. In 1513, more than 2,000 years after Plato's account of Atlantis, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis created a world map that would later ignite both fascination and controversy. Hand-drawn on gazelle skin, the map is remarkable not only for its artistry, but for the knowledge it appears to contain. At first glance, it shows the familiar outlines of Europe, Africa, and South America, drawn at a time when much of the New World was still being explored. But there, at the bottom of the parchment, lies something unexpected, a coastline that some believe resembles the shores of Antarctica. This detail has puzzled historians for centuries. Officially, Antarctica was not sighted by European explorers until the early 19th century. Yet Piri Reis's map, drawn more than 300 years earlier, seems to suggest that someone, somehow, had knowledge of its existence. Even more mysterious is that the coastline on the map appears not as it looks today, buried under miles of ice, but as it might have been long ago, ice-free, with visible bays and inlets. How could this be possible? Piri Reis himself claimed that his map was not entirely his own work. He said he had compiled it using older charts, some drawn by Arab navigators, others said to be even more ancient, passed down from sailors across centuries. He wrote in his notes that he relied on maps dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and perhaps even earlier. If that is true, then the Piri Reis map may preserve knowledge from civilizations long before the age of exploration. Skeptics argue that the resemblance to Antarctica is coincidence, that the mapmaker may have distorted the coastline of South America, extending it too far south. To them, the mystery is less about lost civilizations and more about human error. But others are not so easily convinced. The precision of some details, they claim, is too great to dismiss. Could ancient seafarers have charted lands now hidden beneath ice? Could this map be a fragment of knowledge that survived from a time when Antarctica's climate was different? What gives the enigma its enduring power is not only the geography, but the possibility it suggests. If the map is accurate, if it truly shows Antarctica before it was covered in ice, then humanity must have possessed knowledge far older and far more advanced than we currently believe. Perhaps Plato's story of Atlantis was not merely allegory, but memory. Perhaps maps like the one of Piri Reis are echoes of an age when great civilizations navigated seas now forgotten. The Piri Reis map has inspired countless theories, from lost archives of the Library of Alexandria to civilizations erased by cataclysm, to contact with cultures we know nothing about. Each theory shares a common thread: the belief that our past is deeper and stranger than recorded history allows. Whether it is proof of Atlantis, a glimpse into forgotten knowledge, or simply an error on parchment, the Piri Reis map continues to stir imagination. It reminds us that the past is not always fixed, that sometimes fragments survive in unlikely places, carrying secrets across time. And when we gaze at its mysterious lines, we cannot help but wonder, who first saw those distant shores, and what else did they know? When the world thinks of Antarctica today, it often imagines a land dedicated to peace and science. Yet the story of how the frozen continent came to be seen in this way is tied closely to one of the tensest periods in human history, the Cold War. After the Second World War, nations raced not only to rebuild, but to claim territory, resources, and influence across the globe. Even Antarctica, remote and inhospitable, became part of this silent competition. In 1946, the United States launched Operation High Jump, one of the largest expeditions ever sent to the continent. Led by Admiral Richard Byrd, the mission involved more than 4,000 men, dozens of ships, and aircraft designed to explore and map the icy terrain. Officially, its purpose was scientific and logistical, testing equipment, training personnel, and learning how to operate in extreme cold. But many suspected another motive: strategic positioning in a land that some believed might hold untapped resources or hidden advantages. Other nations followed suit. The Soviet Union, Britain, Chile, Argentina, and Australia all established research bases and laid overlapping territorial claims. Antarctica, once a place of silence, was suddenly filled with watchful eyes and the heavy shadow of rivalry. Rumors spread of secret bases, hidden technology, and discoveries kept out of public view. For those fascinated by mysteries, these years became fertile ground for speculation. If anything unusual were ever found under the ice, ancient ruins, strange artifacts, or even remnants of a forgotten civilization, would the world ever be told? It was in this atmosphere of suspicion and secrecy that the Antarctic Treaty was born. Signed in 1959, at the very height of the Cold War, it was a remarkable achievement. 12 nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, agreed to set aside their rivalries and dedicate the continent solely to peaceful purposes. Military activity was banned. Nuclear testing was prohibited. Scientific cooperation was encouraged. Antarctica would not belong to one nation, but to all humanity. On the surface, the treaty was a triumph of diplomacy, a rare moment of cooperation in an age of mistrust. And indeed, it has endured for decades, preserving Antarctica as a place of research and discovery rather than conflict. But for some, the treaty only deepened the mystery. Why, in an age when every scrap of land was contested, would nations suddenly agree to share such a vast territory? What, if anything, might they have known that prompted such unusual harmony? To believers in the Atlantis legend, the treaty is sometimes viewed not only as a political agreement, but as a quiet pact of secrecy. If ruins or evidence of an ancient civilization lay beneath the ice, they argue, perhaps the great powers agreed it would be better to keep such knowledge hidden until the world was ready. While such claims remain speculation, the unusual history of Antarctic diplomacy continues to fuel curiosity. In truth, the treaty stands as both a shield and a veil. It has protected Antarctica from war and exploitation, but it has also limited the flow of information. The continent remains one of the least explored, least understood places on Earth. And as long as its depths are hidden, the imagination will always wonder what else, besides ice, may be preserved there. For as long as explorers have gazed upon Antarctica's endless white, there have been whispers that beneath the ice lies more than frozen rock. Rumors of hidden structures, of shapes that seem too deliberate to be natural, have lingered for decades. Some of these stories come from grainy satellite images, others from the hushed accounts of those who claim to have seen things with their own eyes. Whether fact, misinterpretation, or wishful imagination, they continue to stir the question: could something man-made, or even older than mankind, sleep beneath the ice? One of the most persistent stories began in the 20th century. when aerial photographs revealed geometric shapes buried under snow. To some, they appeared like pyramids, their sides too sharp, their peaks too perfect to be accidents of nature. Scientists explained them as nunataks, mountain peaks that break through the surface of the ice, sculpted by wind and erosion into sharp ridges. Yet for others, the resemblance was uncanny. Could they be remnants of structures built long before the freeze? Over the years, more anomalies have been spotted. Dark circular formations beneath ice sheets, rectangular ridges that stretch for miles, satellite images that, when viewed through the lens of imagination, suggest buried cities or fortresses. Each discovery fuels speculation. Are these natural features, or could they be the weathered bones of a forgotten civilization, like Atlantis, sealed away in a crypt of ice? Adding to the mystery are accounts from expeditions that return with silence or vague reports. In the age of information, where nearly every corner of the Earth is mapped and photographed, Antarctica remains curiously underexposed. Vast regions are closed to the public, accessible only to scientists under strict guidelines. Military flights sometimes patrol areas far from research bases, deepening suspicions that something more is being guarded. Legends grow easily in such a setting. Some speak of tunnels beneath the ice, carved by ancient hands or by forces unknown. Others imagine colossal machines, relics of a civilization advanced beyond our own, lying dormant until uncovered. Conspiracy theories thrive on the gaps in knowledge, weaving stories of governments and secret projects that hide the truth of what has been found. Of course, scientists offer grounded explanations. Ice sheets can shift and crack in ways that create striking patterns. Satellite distortions can make natural formations look artificial. Human imagination is skilled at seeing order in randomness, turning shadows into walls and ridges into pyramids. Yet the fascination persists, precisely because the land is so inaccessible and the questions so large. The whispers of hidden structures are not only about the possibility of Atlantis, but about the allure of the unknown. In a world where most mysteries have been solved, Antarctica remains a place where secrets could still exist, where something extraordinary might wait in silence. And so, as the wind sweeps across the frozen plains, the rumors endure. Are the shapes beneath the ice mere tricks of nature, or are they the remnants of a lost empire, preserved for tens of thousands of years? Until the ice gives up its secrets, we can only wonder, and listen to the whispers that drift across the silent continent. There is something deeply human about the desire to peer into the unknown, even when we are warned not to. Throughout history, forbidden knowledge has held a special power over the imagination. From ancient myths of gods punishing mortals who reached too high, to the locked shelves of libraries where dangerous books were kept from view, the idea that secrets exist just beyond our grasp has always both frightened and enticed us. Antarctica, with its endless ice and restricted access, has become a modern embodiment of this timeless pull. Few places on Earth remain so untouched, so carefully guarded, and so little explored. Visitors are rare, and even scientific expeditions are limited to certain regions. Whole stretches of land remain off-limits, whether for reasons of safety, logistics, or international agreement. For the curious mind, such restrictions do not reassure, they provoke. They invite questions about what might be hidden, what truths might lie beneath the frozen surface, locked away from the world. Speculation thrives in the shadows left by silence. When photographs of unusual shapes appear and are dismissed quickly, some wonder if there is more to the story. When nations agree to keep Antarctica free of exploitation, others ask whether this is simple diplomacy or a way of concealing discoveries too shocking to reveal. The very absence of clear answers becomes fertile soil for imagination. And in that imagination, Atlantis often takes root. What if the lost city lies there, buried beneath ice that has preserved it for thousands of years? What if temples, libraries, or artifacts sleep untouched, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered? The thought of such knowledge, of wisdom from a forgotten civilization, perhaps more advanced than our own, is intoxicating. It promises not only answers about our past, but also new visions for the future. Yet, at the same time, it carries a sense of danger. If such knowledge exists, would humanity be ready to receive it? Or would it, like in so many myths, overwhelm us, leading to consequences we cannot foresee? The pull of forbidden knowledge is not only about what lies beneath the ice. It is also about what lies within ourselves. The tension between curiosity and caution, between wonder and fear. We are drawn to mysteries because they remind us that the world is larger than our understanding. They make us feel small, but also connected to something greater, as if history itself has left us puzzles to solve. And so, Antarctica continues to call to the dreamers, the seekers, and the restless minds who long to look where they are told not to. Its silence, its remoteness, and its secrecy form a powerful invitation. Whether or not Atlantis sleeps beneath its ice, the continent represents something just as enduring. The idea that some truths are hidden, not because they do not exist, but because the world may not yet be ready to face them. The forbidden always draws us closer, and in the heart of the frozen south, the mystery of Atlantis lingers like a whisper, daring us to listen. When we look at Antarctica today, it is hard to imagine it as anything other than a frozen desert. Endless white stretches to the horizon, and temperatures plunge to levels that few living things can endure. Yet hidden beneath this icy crust lies a startling truth. Antarctica was once alive. Fossils, buried deep in rock and soil, whisper the story of a land that was green, fertile, and teeming with life. Over the last century, scientists have uncovered fragments of this forgotten world. In the transantarctic mountains, explorers stumbled upon the remains of ancient forests, petrified wood, fossilized roots, and even impressions of leaves that had fallen millions of years ago. These were not the leaves of hardy shrubs or tundra plants, but of towering trees, similar to those we might find today in temperate forests. Their presence tells us that Antarctica was once warm enough to sustain vast woodlands, where sunlight streamed through branches and animals moved among the shade. More discoveries followed. In certain regions, scientists unearthed fossils of ferns and cycads, plants that thrive in climates far gentler than the frozen south. They found pollen grains preserved in sediments, microscopic evidence of ecosystems that flourished where now only ice reigns. Each discovery chipped away at the illusion of Antarctica as a land of eternal winter, revealing instead a dynamic continent that has shifted through ages, carrying memories of warmth and abundance. But it was not only plants that once thrived here. Fossilized bones have revealed that dinosaurs walked the Antarctic land. In the 1980s, researchers uncovered the remains of giant reptiles, including species of long-necked sauropods and carnivorous theropods, creatures that roamed the forests when Antarctica was still joined to other continents. Later, they even found evidence of smaller, bird-like dinosaurs, adapted to the unique conditions of polar life, where long summers of sunlight were followed by long, dim winters. Even more surprising are the remains of mammals discovered in the Antarctic fossil record. Tiny marsupials and other ancient species suggest that, millions of years ago, Antarctica was not an isolated wasteland, but a bridge between continents, a place where life moved freely across what was then a greener Earth. These fossils confirm what science has long suspected. Antarctica's past was not one of ice, but of life. Each fossil is a fragment of memory, a reminder that the Earth is always changing. The continents drift, the climates shift, and lands that seem eternal can transform beyond recognition. Today, Antarctica is locked in silence and snow, but its rocks still hold the voices of an earlier age. For those who dream of Atlantis, these discoveries hold particular weight. If a land so cold and desolate could once be lush and alive, then perhaps it could also have been home to people. Perhaps the myths of a great civilization swallowed by cataclysm are not entirely impossible. Fossils may not prove the existence of Atlantis, but they show us that Antarctica is not what it seems, and that beneath the ice, the past still breathes. The story of Antarctica cannot be told without speaking of movement. Though we often imagine continents as fixed and immovable, the truth is far more dynamic. The Earth's surface is a restless mosaic of plates, drifting slowly atop molten layers beneath. Over millions of years, these plates have carried entire continents across the globe, changing oceans, climates, and the lives of every species that dwells upon them. Antarctica, now buried under ice, was once part of this grand migration. Hundreds of millions of years ago, Antarctica did not stand alone at the bottom of the world. Instead, it was joined with Africa, South America, Australia, and India as part of a massive supercontinent known as Gondwana. In that ancient age, the climate was warmer, seas were different, and the lands were connected in ways almost unimaginable to us now. Life flourished across this vast landscape, flowing freely from one region to another, unbroken by the barriers of oceans. As Gondwana slowly fractured and drifted apart, Antarctica began its long journey southward. Over millions of years, the continent crept toward the pole, carried silently but inexorably by the motion of tectonic plates. With this shift came profound changes. Warm, temperate forests gave way to colder conditions. Animals that had once roamed freely grew scarcer. And as Antarctica settled into its polar position, the first signs of ice began to appear. Yet climate is shaped by more than latitude. Earth's orbit tilt, and even atmospheric composition all play roles in the great cycles of warming and cooling. At times, Antarctica remained relatively green despite its southern location, nourished by higher global temperatures. At other times, ice advanced and retreated as glaciers formed and melted across the land. Fossils and geological evidence reveal this rhythm. Forests one era, ice sheets the next. Roughly 34 million years ago, a turning point arrived. The Antarctic continent fully separated from South America, and the Drake Passage opened. With this new channel, a powerful current began to circle the continent, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. Like a wall of water, it isolated Antarctica from the warmer seas to the north. Once this current began to flow, the fate of the continent was sealed. Temperatures plummeted, ice spread, and a permanent sheet began to form, locking Antarctica into the frozen realm we know today. For scientists, this story of shifting continents and changing climates is written in stone, ice cores, and fossilized pollen. But for dreamers of lost civilizations, it sparks a tantalizing thought. If Antarctica was once green, if it once stood free of ice and rich with rivers, then could it also have been a cradle of humanity, or even home to a forgotten culture remembered only in myth? If climate could transform the continent so completely, then perhaps the story of Atlantis is not so far-fetched after all. Antarctica reminds us that the world we know is never permanent. Continents drift, seas rise and fall, climates shift with the slow patience of time. What is frozen today may have once been fertile, and what seems eternal may vanish tomorrow. Beneath the silence of Antarctica lies not only ice, but the memory of lost climates, a reminder that the Earth itself is always in motion. When we think of Antarctica today, the mind paints a stark picture: windswept plains of snow, glaciers stretching to the horizon, and an ocean locked in floating sheets of ice. Yet beneath this frozen mask, the rocks tell a different story, a story of green forests, flowing rivers, and a landscape far warmer than what we see now. Over the past century, scientists have found striking evidence that Antarctica was once home to thriving ecosystems. Deep within the transantarctic mountains, explorers uncovered entire petrified forests. These are not simply fragments of wood, but whole trunks, preserved where they fell more than 200 million years ago. Rings within the trees tell of seasons, growth, and sunlight. It is astonishing to imagine towering forests, alive with the sounds of leaves and birds, standing where now there is only silence and ice. Even more remarkable is the discovery of fossilized leaves, ferns, and even pollen, preserved within the continent's ancient rocks. In certain layers, scientists have found pollen from plants that could only exist in warm, humid conditions, species that today flourish in subtropical regions. These tiny grains, nearly invisible to the naked eye, are powerful storytellers. They speak of forests so dense that they must have carpeted the land, watered by rains and nourished by flowing rivers. In recent decades, drilling deep beneath the ice has revealed sediments that hold additional clues. In 2017, researchers extracted cores from West Antarctica and found traces of ancient soil. Within it were remains of roots and spores, the unmistakable signs of a forest that grew there some 90 million years ago. This discovery stunned scientists. It meant that even when Antarctica had already drifted close to its polar position, it was still warm enough to sustain vast rainforests, filled with rivers winding between the trees. Geologists have also traced evidence of long-vanished waterways carved into the rock. River channels, now frozen in time, snake through regions that have been buried for millions of years. These rivers once carried fresh water from mountains to seas, shaping valleys and nourishing life. Some were as wide as the great rivers we know today, proof that Antarctica was not simply habitable, but flourishing. For those who dream of lost civilizations, such discoveries spark wonder. If rainforests and rivers once stretched across the land, if the continent was alive with greenery and abundance, could it also have been home to people? Could its forests have sheltered communities, its rivers carried trade, its valleys held cities that are now sealed beneath the ice? The evidence does not confirm this, but it does not dismiss it either. It shows us that Antarctica was not always a place of deathly cold, but once a land of life, beauty, and possibility. The ice, for all its silence, has preserved these memories. Beneath its crushing weight lie the records of a time when Antarctica was green and alive, when rivers flowed freely and forests reached for the sun. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding how dramatically the Earth can change, and reminds us that even the most barren lands may once have been gardens of life. Long before Antarctica became the frozen wilderness we know today, it was a land alive with warmth, movement, and abundance. To imagine this place is to step back tens of millions of years, into an age when the Earth looked very different, and when the southernmost continent was not a prison of ice, but a flourishing part of the living world. In that distant time, the land we call Antarctica lay further north, joined to other continents as part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana. Vast forests stretched across its plains, filled with giant ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. Rivers wound their way through valleys, carrying water from mountains down into inland seas. The air was moist and heavy with life, and the land rang with the cries of creatures long vanished from our world. Dinosaurs walked here, their footprints, pressed into soft earth millions of years ago, remain preserved in stone. Fossils tell us of long-necked sauropods lumbering through the forests, of predators stalking their prey in the dappled shadows, of smaller, bird-like dinosaurs adapted to the long summer days and long winter nights. The sun would have circled low over the horizon, casting a strange light upon the land, but it was warm enough to sustain rich ecosystems, unlike anything we associate with Antarctica today. As time passed and climates shifted, the continent slowly began its journey southward. But even as it neared the pole, it did not immediately become cold and barren. For millions of years, warm oceans and greenhouse conditions kept Antarctica green. Fossilized pollen grains and layers of ancient soil reveal that dense rainforests still thrived here as recently as 90 million years ago, even while the continent sat near its present position. Imagine, if you will, a land of rivers and trees stretching all the way to the pole, a lush wilderness in a place we now call lifeless, But nothing on Earth is permanent. Continental drift, changes in Earth's orbit, and shifts in atmospheric carbon gradually transformed the climate. About 34 million years ago, when Antarctica separated from South America and the Antarctic circumpolar current began to flow, the warmth was cut off. The seas isolated the continent, and slowly but surely, ice began to advance. Forests withered, rivers froze, creatures vanished or migrated, leaving behind only fossils and imprints of their passing. A vibrant land slipped quietly into silence as the first great ice sheets claimed their territory. To us, the idea of a warm, green Antarctica feels almost impossible. And yet the rocks, the fossils, and the sediments tell the truth. There was once a land before the freeze, a continent of life, water and forests, erased by the patient hand of time and climate. For those who wonder about Atlantis, this ancient chapter of Antarctica's story sparks a tantalizing thought. If such a land once existed, green and habitable, might it have been home not only to animals and forests, but to people? Could a civilization, now forgotten, have thrived before the freeze sealed everything away? Whether true or not, the vision endures. Beneath the ice lies the memory of a different world, a reminder that nothing in nature is eternal, and that even the coldest silence once echoed with life. When we hear that Antarctica was once covered in forests, rivers, and living creatures, the imagination cannot help but take one step further. If this continent was once habitable, warm, green, and abundant, could humans, or perhaps some earlier civilization, have thrived there before the ice came? The scientific record tells us that Antarctica's great forests and rainforests existed tens of millions of years ago, long before modern humans appeared on Earth. Our own species, Homo sapiens, is only about 100,000 years old, a blink compared to the deep time of Antarctica's ancient past. By this measure, it seems impossible that people could have walked its forests during those warm ages. Yet myths and mysteries are rarely bound by strict timelines. Plato's Atlantis, for example, was said to have existed around 9,000 years before his own time, roughly 11,600 years ago. Interestingly, this is close to the end of the last ice age, when global climates were shifting dramatically. Sea levels were rising as glaciers melted, swallowing coastlines and altering landscapes everywhere. If a civilization had existed in Antarctica during this transitional period, it might have been overwhelmed by advancing ice or catastrophic floods. Its memory, passed down through stories, could have eventually transformed into the legend of Atlantis. Archaeology has already shown that our ancestors were capable of much more, much earlier than once believed. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago, reveal complex architecture long before the rise of known cities. Megalithic structures across Europe, South America, and Asia demonstrate that ancient people had remarkable skills in astronomy, engineering, and art. If they achieved so much elsewhere, is it truly unthinkable that they could have thrived on a continent that has since been buried beneath ice? Supporters of this idea point to mysterious maps, like the Piri Reis chart, which seem to show Antarctica's coastline before it was covered in ice. If true, it suggests that someone, in a forgotten age, had knowledge of the continent when it was still habitable. Were these mapmakers heirs to a lost culture that once lived there? Or did they preserve fragments of knowledge handed down through generations, memories of a land swallowed by climate's relentless change? Skeptics, of course, caution against stretching evidence too far. The fossils of trees and dinosaurs belong to ages long before humans existed. No direct artifacts, no ruins, no tools have ever been found beneath Antarctica's ice. Until such discoveries are made, the idea of human civilizations there remains speculation. And yet, the absence of proof is not always proof of absence. With most of the continent buried under miles of ice, we have barely scratched its surface. Could humans have thrived there? Science tells us it is unlikely, yet the story of Atlantis leaves open a door for imagination. Perhaps there was once a people who found refuge in Antarctica's warmer ages, whose memory lived on in myth long after their cities were lost. Whether fact or fable, the possibility invites us to dream of what may lie hidden still, waiting, preserved beneath the frozen silence of the south. Long before Plato wrote of Atlantis, the people of Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, cradle of some of the world's earliest civilizations, were already telling stories of a flood so vast and so destructive that it reshaped humanity itself. These tales, carved into clay tablets and preserved in epic poetry, remain some of the oldest surviving myths in human history. And to those who hear them today, they echo with a strange familiarity. The most famous of these stories appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a work written nearly 4,000 years ago. In it, Gilgamesh, a great king, seeks wisdom from Utnapishtim, a man granted immortality. Utnapishtim tells him of a flood that once swept across the land, sent by the gods to cleanse a corrupt humanity. Forewarned by the god Ea, Utnapishtim built a great vessel, loaded it with his family, craftsmen and animals, and rode out the storm as waters rose and swallowed the world. When the flood subsided, his boat came to rest upon a mountain, and life began anew. This story bears striking similarities to later tales, most notably the story of Noah's Ark in the Hebrew Bible. Both speak of divine judgment, of catastrophic floods, of a chosen survivor who builds a vessel and saves life from extinction. The parallels suggest not coincidence, but shared memory, a story passed down, reshaped, and retold across generations and cultures. For the people of Mesopotamia, floods were an ever-present danger. Living between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meant fertile soil and abundant crops, but also sudden devastation when the rivers overflowed their banks. Entire villages could be swept away in a single season. It is not surprising, then, that water became a symbol of both life and destruction, and that memories of great floods took root in the collective imagination. Yet some scholars believe the myths may point to more than local river floods. Around 7,600 years ago, rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age may have caused massive inundations across the Near East. One theory suggests that the Black Sea was once a freshwater lake, until rising Mediterranean waters surged through the Bosporus, flooding the basin in a cataclysm remembered in myth. To those who lived through it, such an event would have seemed like the end of the world, a flood sent by gods. For those who wonder about Atlantis, these Mesopotamian flood myths are tantalizing. They show that ancient peoples remembered cataclysms not only as history, but as moral lessons. Like Atlantis, the Mesopotamian flood is a tale of judgment, survival, and renewal. It tells us that the memory of great floods, whether local or global, is deeply woven into human culture. Perhaps Atlantis is part of this same tapestry, another story of a land lost to water, preserved in memory because the event was too immense to forget. Whether we see it as allegory, history, or both, the flood myths of Mesopotamia remind us that water has always been both a giver and taker of life, and that in its depths, humanity has always sensed mystery. Far from the rivers of Mesopotamia, in the ancient lands of India, another tradition of epic storytelling preserved memories of floods, lost ages, and vanished worlds. The vast body of Indian mythology, woven through the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and the Puranas, contains some of the most intricate and enduring accounts of cosmic cycles and destruction. In these stories, history is not a straight line, but a repeating circle, where civilizations rise, fall, and are reborn again. One of the oldest and most striking flood legends in India is the tale of Manu, a figure who, like Noah or Utnapishtim, becomes the chosen survivor of a great deluge. According to the story, Manu once discovered a tiny fish struggling in the water. He cared for it, and in gratitude, the fish revealed itself to be an avatar of the god Vishnu. The fish warned Manu of an impending flood that would sweep away all life. Guided by Vishnu, Manu built a great boat, and when the waters rose, he was saved, along with seeds of life that would repopulate the earth. This story is not just about survival, but about continuity, the idea that life, though fragile, always finds a way to endure. Like Atlantis, it speaks of sudden disaster, divine intervention, and the preservation of wisdom across ages. To listeners thousands of years ago, it was both a warning and a comfort. Destruction may come, but renewal always follows. The great epic of the Mahabharata, too, speaks of cycles of time, ages known as yugas, that end in upheaval before new eras begin. Within its sprawling verses are accounts of lost knowledge, ancient weapons of unimaginable power, and cities destroyed in cataclysm. Some scholars have seen echoes of historical memory in these tales, reminders of wars or natural disasters that left indelible marks on the culture. Others view them as allegories of moral struggle, teaching that pride, greed, and violence inevitably bring downfall. The Puranas, a later collection of texts, expand on this idea with detailed accounts of floods and destructions. They describe entire worlds swallowed by water, only to rise again in new forms. This vision of recurring cycles differs from the linear histories of Greece or Rome. In Indian thought, destruction is never final. It is part of a larger rhythm of creation, preservation, and renewal, a dance guided by divine hands. For those searching for Atlantis, these Indian stories are fascinating. They suggest that the memory of great floods and vanished civilizations is not limited to one culture, but part of a shared human experience. The idea that worlds can be lost, that wisdom can disappear, and that civilizations can sink into myth is found not only in Plato's Greece, but in India's sacred texts as well. Perhaps Atlantis is another variation of this universal theme. A shining world undone by disaster, remembered not as simple history, but as myth carrying a lesson. In this way, the legends of India join the voices of Mesopotamia and Greece, whispering of floods, of loss, and of civilizations that once were, and may yet be again. Across the vast lands of the Americas, from the icy north to the deserts and forests of the south, native peoples have preserved stories passed down through countless generations. These tales, spoken by firelight and carried in memory, often describe worlds that came before our own, worlds destroyed by floods, fire, or darkness, only to be replaced by new beginnings. Like Plato's Atlantis, they speak of civilizations undone by disaster, and of survivors who carried wisdom into the present age. Among the Hopi people of the American Southwest, there is the belief in previous worlds, or world ages, that ended in catastrophe. According to their tradition, humanity once lived in earlier worlds, but each was destroyed when people turned away from harmony and balance. One world was consumed by fire, another by ice, and another by flood. The flood story, in particular, tells of people who survived by taking refuge inside hollow reeds, floating safely above the waters until they reached dry land. From there, they began anew, guided by spiritual beings who reminded them of the importance of balance with nature. Farther north, in the traditions of the Cree and other First Nations peoples, stories also speak of a flood that covered the earth. In these accounts, the Creator asked animals to dive into the waters to retrieve soil from beneath the flood. One by one, the animals tried and failed, until at last the muskrat, though small and weak, succeeded. From that small clump of earth, land was reborn and life began again. The story is not only about disaster, but also about humility, resilience, and the power of even the smallest creature to shape destiny. The Aztec and Maya cultures of Central America preserved their own visions of lost worlds. In Aztec mythology, humanity lived through a series of suns, or ages. Each sun ended in catastrophe, one destroyed by jaguars, another by wind, another by fire, and one by a great flood. The current age, they believed, was the fifth sun, destined one day to end as well. These cycles echo the Indian concept of yugas and remind us that many cultures viewed time as repeating, with worlds constantly rising and falling. In the high Andes, the Inca spoke of Viracocha, a great creator god who emerged from Lake Titicaca after a flood destroyed an earlier world. He reshaped the land, created new people, and taught them how to live. The memory of the flood remained, not just as a story of destruction, but as proof that divine forces guide the rhythm of rise and fall. When we hear these Native American tales alongside the legends of Mesopotamia, India, and Greece, a pattern begins to emerge. Across cultures separated by oceans, people remembered floods and disasters that ended earlier ages. They spoke of survivors, of renewal, and of lessons carried forward. Perhaps these are simply shared metaphors, stories meant to explain natural disasters and human frailty. Or perhaps they are echoes of real events, cataclysms that shaped memory across the world. In either case, the message is the same. No civilization is eternal, and even the greatest worlds can be swept away, leaving behind only stories of what once was. Few civilizations on Earth have left behind mysteries as enduring as ancient Egypt. The pyramids, the Sphinx, and the great temples rising along the Nile still speak across millennia, whispering of knowledge both practical and symbolic. Among the many legends preserved by the Egyptians is the idea that their own wisdom came from a time before time, from earlier ages of the world, now long forgotten. These whispers of lost epochs echo closely with the story of Atlantis. Plato himself hinted at this connection. In his dialogues, he wrote that the tale of Atlantis was not a Greek invention, but a memory preserved in Egypt. According to his account, Solon, the great Athenian statesman, had travelled to the city of Sais around 600 BCE. There, Egyptian priests told him of an advanced civilization that existed 9,000 years before Plato's time. They described an island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules that fell in a single night of catastrophe. Solon brought the story back to Greece, and generations later, Plato committed it to writing. If this account is true, the Egyptians saw themselves not as the originators of the tale, but as guardians of a memory far older than their own kingdom. They believed their records stretched back thousands of years, preserving fragments of earlier ages when the earth was struck by floods, fire, and upheaval. For them, history was not a straight line, but a series of cycles, each ending in destruction and renewal. Even within their own myths, the Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time. This was not merely the beginning of history, but a golden age when gods and semi-divine beings walked the earth, bringing knowledge and order. According to temple inscriptions, Zep-Tepi was a time when wisdom was given to humanity, when great works were accomplished before the current era began. To later priests and scribes, their civilization was but a shadow of that earlier greatness. Some modern scholars argue that Zep-Tepi was symbolic, a mythic way to frame the divine origin of culture. Yet others wonder if it points to something more, a dim memory of an actual earlier age, perhaps even a lost civilization erased by natural catastrophe. The Sphinx itself fuels such speculation. Geological studies suggest that erosion on its body may be older than the traditional dating of dynastic Egypt. If true, it raises questions about whether remnants of earlier ages lie hidden in plain sight, built long before the pharaohs ruled. For those who dream of Atlantis, Egypt offers tantalizing hints. A land of deep time, of monuments aligned with stars, of traditions that spoke of cycles and catastrophes. If any culture could have preserved memory of a lost world, it would be the Egyptians, whose scribes recorded knowledge not just for themselves, but for eternity. Perhaps Atlantis was remembered in their myths of floods. Perhaps Zep-Tepi was another name for a forgotten age, when a shining civilization flourished and fell. We may never know for certain, but In the whispers of Egypt's monuments, carved in stone and carried across centuries, there lingers the suggestion that our world has seen greatness before, greatness that time and catastrophe have erased. When we place the flood myths of Mesopotamia beside those of India, the stories of the Hopi beside those of the Aztec, and the whispers of Egypt alongside Plato's Atlantis, a striking pattern emerges. Across cultures separated by oceans, deserts, and mountains, there is a recurring theme: the memory of a great flood, of civilizations lost, and of survival in the face of overwhelming waters. It is easy to dismiss such stories as coincidence. After all, rivers have always overflowed their banks, seas have always risen and fallen, and storms have always left destruction behind. Floods are among the most common disasters faced by humanity, and so it is natural that they would appear often in myth. Yet, the similarities are sometimes too precise, too resonant to ignore. Over and over, we hear of a world undone by water, of chosen survivors warned by divine powers, of vessels or shelters that preserved life, and of new beginnings after devastation. The possibility arises that these myths are not separate inventions, but echoes of shared memory, distant recollections of real cataclysms, passed down orally through generations until they became legend. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted. Coastlines disappeared, islands sank, and whole landscapes changed forever. To the people who lived through it, these events would have felt apocalyptic. Villages, hunting grounds, and sacred sites vanished beneath the waves. What better way to explain such trauma than in stories of floods sent by gods? Plato's dating of Atlantis, set around 9600 BCE, is strikingly close to this period of global upheaval. He spoke of a mighty civilization undone by sudden catastrophe, swallowed by the sea in a single night. Whether Atlantis was real or allegory, his timing coincides with a moment in human prehistory when rising waters reshaped the earth. Could Atlantis, then, be one version of a memory preserved in many cultures? The memory of a flood that ended one world and began another? The idea of a shared memory does not require Atlantis to be real in every detail. Instead, it suggests that humanity carries within its myths the shadows of ancient experiences. Like fossils embedded in stone, these stories hold impressions of events too vast to forget, but too distant to recall precisely. Over time, they became shaped into moral tales, each culture giving them its own gods, heroes, and lessons. Yet at their heart, they may all point to a truth, that our ancestors lived through floods so great they changed the course of history. And so, from Mesopotamia to India, from the Americas to Egypt, the story repeats. Water rising, worlds ending, life beginning anew. Whether told as divine judgment, cosmic cycle, or tragic fate, the Great Flood binds human cultures together. It is a reminder that we are not separate peoples with separate histories, but one species, sharing one earth, shaped by the same forces of nature. Perhaps Atlantis is not just a Greek story, but part of this global memory, a symbol of the fragility of civilization and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of disaster. And perhaps, in the silence of Antarctica's ice, echoes of that memory still remain, waiting to be uncovered. When Plato described Atlantis, he did not simply speak of its power or its wealth. He lingered on its design, its architecture, and its astonishing harmony with nature. To him, Atlantis was not just a city, but a symbol of human ingenuity, laid out with precision and purpose. This image of a civilization whose architecture reflected both beauty and mastery of geometry has inspired dreamers ever since. The capital of Atlantis, according to Plato, was arranged in concentric circles of land and water, like ripples spreading outward from a stone dropped into a pond. 3 rings of sea alternated with 2 rings of land, all connected by bridges and canals. At the very center rose the royal palace and the temple of Poseidon, encircled by walls clad in shining metals. This was no haphazard city, but one carefully designed, where geometry guided every line and symmetry mirrored cosmic order. Such a vision is striking even today. Concentric circles form patterns that are both practical and symbolic. Practical because canals provide transport and defense. Symbolic because circles represent eternity, perfection, and balance. In an age when most settlements grew organically without central planning, Plato's Atlantis stands out as a vision of deliberate architecture, as if its builders worked from blueprints that reflected not only human needs, but also universal harmony. Geometry has always been at the heart of great civilizations. In Egypt, the pyramids embody mathematical precision, aligned with stars and cardinal points. In Greece, temples like the Parthenon use ratios and proportions to create harmony. In India, sacred mandalas mirror cosmic order through circles and squares. To imagine Atlantis as a city of circles is to see it as part of this tradition, a place where architecture embodied philosophy, where stone and water together expressed a higher order. Some modern thinkers have wondered whether Plato's description was more than allegory. Could it reflect real achievements of an ancient civilization? Across the world, we see ruins that puzzle archaeologists even today. Massive stone blocks fitted with impossible precision, monuments aligned perfectly with celestial events, vast networks of roads and canals. Might Atlantis have been another such culture, one whose knowledge of geometry allowed it to build cities that still inspire us? Even in myth, the architecture of Atlantis is remembered as grand, but not ostentatious. It was not merely about size or strength, but about proportion, function, and beauty. The canals that circled the city allowed ships to reach the heart of the capital. The walls gleamed not only as fortifications, but as works of art. The palace at the center was the crown jewel, the point where all circles met, symbolizing both authority and unity. For Plato, the architecture of Atlantis was more than description. It was metaphor. The perfect geometry of the city mirrored the ideal order of society. When the Atlanteans lived in balance with virtue, the circles of their city reflected harmony. But when pride and corruption grew, that harmony collapsed, and the city fell. And yet, the image remains. A shining city of circles, a masterpiece of geometry, rising from the sea. Whether it ever stood in stone or only in the imagination, Atlantis continues to inspire the belief that human architecture can reach beyond shelter and utility. that it can touch the divine. Beyond architecture and geometry, the legend of Atlantis often hints at something even more intriguing. The possibility that the Atlanteans possessed forms of energy and technology far beyond what we usually associate with the ancient world. Plato himself does not go into detail about machines or inventions, but later interpretations, combined with fragments of myth and speculation, have built a picture of a civilization whose knowledge may have bordered on the extraordinary. Central to these ideas is the mythical metal orichalcum, described by Plato as one of the most precious materials of Atlantis, second only to gold. Its name means mountain copper, but its properties remain mysterious. Some imagine it as a gleaming alloy with unusual strength or conductivity, perhaps even capable of channeling energy. If Atlantis had access to rare materials unknown to others, could they have developed tools or devices lost to time? Writers through the ages have expanded upon Plato's sparse descriptions, suggesting that Atlantis may have mastered natural forces in ways that resemble technology. Some accounts speak of crystals used for power, vast stones that stored and radiated energy, harnessed for lighting, healing, or communication. In the 19th and 20th centuries, mystics and esoteric thinkers revived this idea, claiming that the Atlanteans drew energy directly from the earth itself, using crystalline structures as conduits. To modern ears, this sounds like fantasy, yet it reflects humanity's enduring fascination with the hidden powers of the natural world. Others imagine that Atlantis may have understood electricity or magnetism, not in the industrial sense we know, but in subtle ways integrated into daily life. Ancient cultures elsewhere left behind hints of advanced knowledge, the Baghdad battery, for instance, or the precision stone cutting seen at sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru. Could Atlantis, if it existed, have been another cradle of forgotten science? Perhaps they had mastered water as energy, using canals not only for transport, but as power sources. Or perhaps they had tapped into geothermal heat beneath their island. These ideas remain speculation, of course. No physical evidence of Atlantean machines has ever been found. Yet myths often carry metaphors for real practices. Stories of crystals may be symbolic of refined tools or sacred stones. Tales of lost energy may reflect advanced agriculture, irrigation, or astronomy. Technologies that bow to less advanced neighbors might have seemed magical. Still, the allure of lost technology is strong. The image of a civilization drawing power from nature in elegant, sustainable ways stands in contrast to our modern struggles with energy. Perhaps Atlantis endures in imagination because it offers not only mystery, but a dream. The dream of knowledge without corruption, of technology that harmonizes with the earth instead of consuming it. Whether or not Atlantis wielded energy unknown to us, the myths remind us of a deeper truth. Every civilization has knowledge that may be lost, only to leave behind tantalizing hints in story and symbol. In the end, Atlantis's supposed technology may be less about machines and more about the enduring human hope that wisdom, once lost, might one day be rediscovered. If Atlantis truly existed, one of its greatest strengths may not have been its buildings or its treasures, but its knowledge of the seas and stars. To Plato, the Atlanteans were a seafaring people, commanding great fleets and extending their influence across distant lands. Their mastery of navigation would have been essential to such power. And in the ancient world, navigation was not guided by compasses or charts, but by the heavens themselves. Across history, the sea has been both pathway and barrier. To venture upon it required courage, skill, and above all, knowledge of how to find one's way across open waters. For the Atlanteans to reach and conquer distant shores, they must have possessed advanced methods of orientation, reading the winds, the waves, and most importantly, the stars. Their very survival as an empire would have depended on it. The connection between stars and navigation is as old as seafaring itself. Polynesian voyages in the Pacific used detailed star maps, committing to memory which constellations rose and set along specific horizons. Norse sailors followed the North Star across the Atlantic. In Egypt, the alignment of monuments reveals an intimate knowledge of celestial cycles. If these cultures achieved so much, might Atlantis have been another, perhaps even earlier, master of the heavens? Plato's description of Atlantis as a wealthy, expansive empire hints that its people may have understood astronomy not only for navigation, but also for agriculture, religion, and timekeeping. Many ancient societies observed the heavens to track seasons and to mark sacred festivals. In the same way, Atlantis might have charted the stars to guide both their ships and their rituals, blending practical knowledge with spiritual meaning. Some modern interpretations suggest that Atlantis may have been aligned with celestial events, much like Stonehenge or the pyramids of Giza. The concentric circles of its capital, as described by Plato, have been imagined as more than a city, perhaps a cosmic diagram, a reflection of planetary motion, or even a calendar in stone. If so, the Atlanteans may have used geometry not only to build, but to mirror the heavens upon the earth. The sea itself also offered knowledge. Ancient peoples learned to read wave patterns, the flight of birds, the color of the water, and the shape of clouds to know where land lay beyond the horizon. The Atlanteans, masters of fleets, must have combined this intimate understanding of the ocean with their observations of the stars, creating a system of navigation that allowed them to sail with confidence across vast distances. To those they encountered, such skill may have seemed like magic. Of course, no records survive to prove the Atlanteans had such knowledge. Yet, the echoes of their legend invite comparison to real cultures that did. Perhaps the memory of Atlantis as a maritime empire reflects our ancestors' awareness that mastery of the seas and stars was the true measure of greatness. And so, in the myth of Atlantis, we see not only a lost land, but a symbol of ancient wisdom, of ships guided by constellations, of cities aligned with the heavens, of a people who looked both outward to the sea and upward to the stars, weaving the two into a single vision of order and exploration. If the Atlanteans truly existed, their greatness may not have rested only on wealth, armies, or even their knowledge of the stars. Many traditions that speak of lost civilizations emphasize something deeper, a kind of wisdom that joined the practical with the sacred. Atlantis, in this view, was remembered not only as a place of physical power, but also as a center of spiritual knowledge. Plato described Atlantis as a land devoted to Poseidon, god of the sea. At the very center of the capital stood a great temple in his honor, its walls lined with orichalcum, its roof adorned with ivory and gold. Inside, a massive statue of Poseidon, driving 6 winged horses, towered over worshippers. This was not simple ornamentation. The temple symbolized the Atlanteans' bond with the divine, their belief that their power flowed from a sacred connection to forces greater than themselves. In many cultures, sacred wisdom was passed through ritual, myth, and initiation. The Egyptians preserved knowledge of cosmic cycles within their temples. The Vedic traditions of India spoke of mantras and meditation as tools for reaching higher truth. Native American peoples carried oral traditions that linked humanity to earth and sky. If Atlantis was real, might it have possessed its own sacred sciences? Teachings that blended spiritual understanding with practical knowledge of nature? Later traditions and esoteric writers have imagined Atlantis as a place where spiritual and scientific knowledge were one. They speak of priest-kings who understood the harmony of the cosmos, of rituals that attuned the people to celestial forces, and of energies channeled through sacred architecture. In these visions, the concentric rings of Atlantis were not only for defense, but symbolic patterns, embodying balance and order, much like mandalas or sacred geometry found in other traditions. Some myths suggest that the Atlanteans had access to powers of the mind that we no longer understand. Telepathy, clairvoyance, or the ability to heal with thought or sound. These ideas are often woven into the legend. While such claims are not supported by evidence, they reflect humanity's longing for a time when wisdom was holistic, when body, mind, spirit, and world were seen as inseparable. The downfall of Atlantis, according to Plato, came not from loss of knowledge, but from loss of virtue. The people, once noble, turned greedy and arrogant. In spiritual terms, they lost their connection to the sacred, replacing reverence with ambition. The temple of Poseidon may have remained, but its meaning was forgotten. This decline mirrored the decline of their society, until finally judgment came and the island sank. For those who listen to the whispers of Atlantis today, its legacy is often imagined as spiritual. It represents the dream of a civilization that lived in harmony with the cosmos, where wisdom was not divided into science and religion, but unified into a single vision of truth. Whether real or symbolic, Atlantis reminds us of the importance of balance between material progress and spiritual depth, between knowledge and humility. Perhaps this is why the story endures. The image of Atlantis stirs not only curiosity about lost lands, but also longing for sacred wisdom and spiritual power, a reminder that true greatness may rest not in what we build, but in how we live in harmony with the world and the mysteries beyond it. Every legend leaves behind not only questions, but also echoes, fragments of what might have been, imagined through the stories of later generations. When we think of Atlantis, we cannot help but wonder what traces of their civilization, if it truly existed, might remain hidden beneath the sea or beneath the ice. No ruins have ever been uncovered, no artifacts confirmed. And yet, the imagination fills the silence with possibilities. Some picture libraries, vast halls filled with scrolls, tablets, or even crystal records containing the wisdom of ages. If Atlantis had truly mastered architecture, navigation, and spiritual knowledge, surely they would have preserved their discoveries in archives meant to endure. The dream of a lost library of Atlantis is powerful because it speaks to our longing for answers. Answers about our past, about the cosmos, and about mysteries we cannot yet solve. To imagine such a library lying beneath the ice of Antarctica is to dream of a treasure more valuable than gold, the wisdom of forgotten ages, waiting to be rediscovered. Others imagine technologies unlike anything we know, machines that drew energy from natural forces, tools that shaped stone with precision beyond our own, or instruments that measured the heavens with astonishing accuracy. Such visions are speculative, but they reflect a common theme: the belief that our ancestors may have once held knowledge that we, in our modern world, have lost. The very absence of evidence invites us to project these dreams, filling the gaps with visions of wonders buried in silence. Myths also speak of sacred relics, crystals, staffs, or objects imbued with spiritual power. In later centuries, esoteric traditions claimed that fragments of Atlantean wisdom survived in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, or in secret societies. Whether these claims hold truth is less important than the yearning they express, a desire to connect to something larger, something that suggests humanity's story is deeper than we are taught. Perhaps what Atlantis left behind is not material at all, but cultural. The memory of a lost golden age, repeated in flood myths across the world, may itself be their legacy. By inspiring countless generations with stories of greatness undone by pride, the Atlanteans, real or imagined, continue to shape how we think about civilization. In this sense, their greatest gift is the lesson of humility, the warning that no matter how high we build, our achievements rest upon fragile foundations. And yet, the thought persists that something more tangible may still exist. Beneath the miles of Antarctic ice, structures could lie preserved, locked away in frozen vaults. Beneath the seas, ruins may rest undiscovered, waiting for exploration to reach them. Until then, all we have is imagination. What we imagine Atlantis left behind tells us as much about ourselves as it does about the legend. We project our hopes, our fears, and our longing for wisdom into the story. Whether libraries, technologies, relics, or lessons, Atlantis remains a symbol of what is lost, and of what might one day be found. The modern story of Antarctica truly began in the age of exploration, when ships first ventured into its icy waters, and men glimpsed the edges of a continent that had, until then, existed only in theory. From the beginning, the land inspired not only awe, but also strange stories, as if its silence and isolation encouraged the imagination to wander. In 1773, the great navigator, Captain James Cook, crossed the Antarctic Circle for the first time. Though he never set foot on the continent itself, he sailed close enough to encounter massive icebergs and pack ice so dense that further passage was impossible. Cook wrote in his journals of a forbidding region, doomed by nature never once to feel the warmth of the sun's rays. Yet he also hinted at mystery, suggesting that land lay further south, concealed behind the icy barriers. His words planted the seeds of fascination for generations to come. In the early 19th century, the first confirmed sightings of Antarctica were made almost simultaneously by expeditions from Russia, Britain, and the United States. Explorers reported vast ice shelves, mountains rising like ghostly peaks, and coasts locked in eternal cold. But with these accounts came whispers of anomalies, shapes on the horizon that looked like fortresses, black rocks protruding from the snow like towers, and mirages that made the land seem to shift and change before their eyes. Some sailors returned with tales of strange sounds, distant booms echoing across the ice, or low rumbles beneath their feet, as though something vast was moving deep below modern science explains these as the natural creaks and groans of glaciers, or the cracking of ice under pressure. Yet to men in the 19th century, far from home and surrounded by an alien landscape, such phenomena seemed almost supernatural. There were also reports, often second-hand, of lands lush with vegetation hidden beyond the ice. Whalers in the southern oceans told stories of coasts where green hills and forests appeared through the mist, only to vanish again. These were likely mirages caused by atmospheric refraction, a trick of light bending over the horizon. Still, the rumors persisted, and some began to speculate that Antarctica might not be all ice, but could conceal temperate regions, or even ancient ruins, beneath its frozen shell. By the early 20th century, during the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, men like Ernest Shackleton and Robert Falcon Scott pushed deeper into the continent. Their journeys brought new knowledge, but also strange encounters. Mirages that made mountains seem to float, optical illusions that turned shadows into walls, and eerie silences so complete they unnerved even the bravest. Shackleton himself once wrote of a mysterious presence he and his men felt while trudging across the ice, as if an unseen companion marched beside them. He could not explain it, but the account lingers as one of the great enigmas of Antarctic exploration. These early explorers returned with maps and data, but also with stories that stirred the imagination. Antarctica revealed itself as a place of extremes, but also as a canvas upon which the human mind painted visions of the unknown. Strange shapes, unexplainable sounds, illusions of green lands, all contributed to the sense that the continent was more than it seemed, and that perhaps beneath its ice lay secrets far older than any modern discovery. When the first explorers charted Antarctica, they relied on wooden ships, sextants, and the uncertain compass of the stars. Today, however, we peer down from above. Satellites, orbiting high in space, can capture every detail of Earth's surface, even those concealed beneath thick layers of ice. Yet, with this new perspective has come a new wave of mystery. For in the endless whiteness of Antarctica, some images reveal shapes that seem to defy explanation. Among the most famous of these are the so-called pyramids of Antarctica. In satellite photographs, certain mountain peaks appear as sharp, triangular forms rising cleanly from the ice. Their symmetry is striking, almost too perfect, and to the imaginative eye they resemble the pyramids of Giza or the great stone temples of Central America. Scientists explain them as nunataks, rocky peaks carved by wind, snow, and time into jagged points. but for others, their shape seems deliberate, as if they were the weathered remains of ancient monuments buried beneath the ice. Other anomalies have been noted as well. Circular formations, hundreds of feet across, visible in the snowfields, appear in images taken by orbiting satellites. Rectangular ridges stretch for miles, resembling walls or foundations. Deep black voids show up in certain regions, as though vast openings lead into the frozen continent below. Many of these can be explained as natural crevasses, shadows, or distortions caused by satellite imaging technology. Yet the more unusual the pattern, the more speculation it inspires. One image in particular, captured in 2012, shows what appears to be a massive entrance, a dark oval set into the side of a snow-covered mountain. Theories sprang up quickly. Was it a cave carved by nature? A hollow formed by collapsing ice? Or could it be something more? Perhaps an ancient structure, or even an entrance to a hidden base. The photograph spread across the internet, fueling endless debate, and remains one of the most cited proofs of Antarctic mystery. Of course, skeptics caution that the human mind is skilled at seeing patterns where none exist. A trick of light and shadow, or the jagged forces of erosion, can easily be mistaken for architecture. Still, it is difficult to ignore how many such anomalies continue to appear. In the absence of full exploration, these images stand as tantalizing puzzles, inviting us to imagine what might lie beneath the frozen surface. Satellite radar and ground-penetrating scans add to the intrigue. These technologies can peer through ice, mapping the land below. In some places, they have revealed mountains, valleys, and even what seem to be vast buried lakes. To science, these are natural features, part of Antarctica's geological past. To dreamers, however, they suggest the possibility of something more. Perhaps the remains of a world that predates the ice, sealed away like a time capsule. What satellites have given us is a paradox. More knowledge, and yet more mystery. Each anomaly invites explanation, but also sparks wonder. The frozen continent, even under the gaze of machines that circle the Earth, continues to guard its secrets. And so, from the stars above, we see not only snow and rock, but hints of something waiting, silent shapes that leave us asking whether we are glimpsing nature, or the echoes of Atlantis itself. Wherever mystery thrives, conspiracy is never far behind. Antarctica, with its vast silence, restricted access, and the weight of secrets hidden beneath miles of ice, has become one of the most fertile grounds for speculation in the modern imagination. From whispered rumors of secret research facilities to wild claims of hidden civilizations, the frozen continent has been cast not only as a scientific frontier, but also as a stage for clandestine operations. One of the most enduring tales concerns Nazi Germany during the Second World War. According to certain accounts, the Germans launched expeditions to Antarctica in the late 1930s, establishing a base they called Neuschwabenland. Officially, these missions mapped parts of the continent and laid territorial claims. But conspiracy theories suggest something more dramatic, that the Nazis discovered caves beneath the ice, established secret fortresses, and perhaps even developed advanced technology hidden from the world. After the war, these stories only grew, with some claiming that submarines carried treasures or leaders south, vanishing into the icy unknown. In 1946, when the United States launched Operation High Jump, involving thousands of men, ships, and aircraft, rumors flourished again. Officially, the mission tested equipment in extreme cold and trained personnel for polar operations. Yet the sheer scale of the expedition led some to believe it had another purpose, perhaps to locate and eliminate secret enemy bases hidden beneath the ice. Admiral Richard Byrd, who led the operation, was later quoted in interviews as speaking about a potential threat coming from the polar regions. To conspiracy theorists, this was proof that Antarctica held more than ice and snow. As the Cold War unfolded, secrecy deepened. Both the United States and the Soviet Union established research stations on the continent, supposedly dedicated to science. Yet some began to suspect that these bases might conceal military activities or even discoveries kept hidden from the public. Stories circulated of ancient ruins uncovered and swiftly covered up, of scientists stumbling upon artifacts too shocking to reveal. None of these tales were ever verified, but their persistence speaks to the aura of mystery that Antarctica carries. In more recent years, the rise of the internet has breathed new life into these theories. Satellite anomalies, blurred out regions on maps, and restricted zones have all been seized upon as evidence of hidden structures. Some imagine underground cities, others vast hangars where secret technologies are stored. A few even claim that Antarctica conceals not human bases, but remnants of an earlier advanced civilization, Atlantis itself, locked away in vaults of ice. Skeptics argue that the truth is far more mundane. The harsh conditions make exploration difficult, and secrecy often surrounds research simply because of international treaties and sensitive data. Still, the allure of forbidden knowledge is strong. The less we know about Antarctica, the easier it is to believe that its frozen silence conceals truths too dangerous to share. Whether fact or fiction, conspiracy theories remind us of something deeper: humanity's hunger for mystery. We long to believe that the world still holds secrets, that beyond the boundaries of ordinary knowledge lie wonders waiting to be revealed. And in Antarctica, vast, hidden, and untouchable, the imagination finds fertile ground to plant its most daring stories. While conspiracy theories swirl around hidden bases and forbidden knowledge, scientists continue their work in Antarctica with quieter tools: drills, ice cores, and careful observation. These efforts may lack the drama of rumor, but in their own way, they reveal truths about the continent even more astonishing than legend. For beneath the ice lies a record of Earth's history, preserved in frozen layers like the pages of a book. One of the greatest achievements of Antarctic science has been the study of ice cores. By drilling deep into the ice sheet and extracting cylinders of compacted snow, scientists can peer back in time for hundreds of thousands of years. Trapped air bubbles hold ancient atmospheres, showing how carbon dioxide levels, temperatures, and climates have shifted over millennia. In some cores, the story stretches back more than 800,000 years, giving us insight into the rise and fall of ice ages. These discoveries have transformed our understanding of climate, linking modern warming to patterns long hidden in the frozen archive. But Antarctica's ice does not only preserve air, it also conceals entire landscapes. Beneath the ice sheet, radar and satellite scans have revealed mountains, valleys, and even rivers long buried. Perhaps the most famous discovery is Lake Vostok, a body of liquid water sealed beneath more than 2 miles of ice. Untouched by sunlight for millions of years, the lake may host unique forms of microbial life, surviving in complete darkness. When scientists drilled into it carefully, they found traces of bacteria unlike any known elsewhere on Earth. To many, this was a reminder that life can endure in even the harshest conditions, and perhaps beyond our planet as well. Other subglacial lakes and rivers have since been detected, suggesting that Antarctica's hidden world is not static, but alive with slow, secret flows. Vast networks of water may circulate beneath the ice, shaping the land and influencing how glaciers move. Some scientists even suggest that ancient ecosystems could be preserved there, waiting to tell us stories of climates millions of years old. Then there are the fossil discoveries. In the Transantarctic mountains, researchers have uncovered remains of forests, leaves, and even dinosaur bones. These finds prove beyond doubt that the continent was once warm, green, and teeming with life. More recently, drilling cores revealed traces of soil from a 90-million-year-old rainforest. A startling reminder that Antarctica once looked more like modern-day New Zealand than the barren wasteland we know now. Each discovery adds to the sense that Antarctica is not just frozen wilderness, but a time capsule of Earth's history. To the scientific mind, it is a laboratory for studying climate change, geology, and the resilience of life. To the dreamer, however, these same discoveries suggest possibility. If lakes can remain liquid beneath the ice, if ancient rainforests can be preserved in sediment, then what else might endure, sealed away in silence? Could ruins, artifacts, or even fragments of forgotten civilizations lie hidden alongside fossils and microbes, waiting for the right drill to uncover them? Science does not claim Atlantis lies beneath Antarctica. Yet every core drilled, every fossil found, deepens the mystery. The more we learn, the more we realize how much remains unknown, and how many secrets may still sleep beneath the ice. For all the maps drawn, the satellites launched, and the drilling projects undertaken, Antarctica remains the most mysterious continent on Earth. In truth, we know only fragments of its story. Vast regions of its interior have never been walked by human feet. Beneath its ice lie mountains taller than the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and lakes the size of seas. Yet these wonders remain sealed, silent, and largely untouched. Part of the mystery lies in scale. The ice sheet that covers Antarctica is so thick, up to 4 kilometers in some places, that even our most advanced technologies struggle to peer through it clearly. Radar and satellite scans reveal outlines, but the details remain blurred. It is as though the continent itself chooses what to reveal and what to conceal. Scientists can sense the shape of buried landscapes, but they cannot yet say what sleeps in the shadows of those valleys. Another part lies in access. Antarctica is protected by the Antarctic Treaty, which prohibits exploitation and restricts entry. Only scientists, researchers, and carefully guided expeditions are permitted to explore its depths, and even they must follow strict limitations. For the rest of the world, the continent is distant, unreachable, and hidden. Where most lands are photographed, mapped, and traversed daily, Antarctica exists as a blank space in our imagination. It is in those blank spaces that mystery thrives. Even with scientific progress, questions multiply. What lies beneath the hundreds of subglacial lakes that have yet to be sampled? What secrets rest in sediments at the bottom of the seas that ring the continent? What fossils, what records of lost ages still wait beneath the ice sheets, preserved like messages in a bottle? Each new discovery seems to confirm that Antarctica holds more than we ever guessed. To the scientific mind, what remains hidden is a matter of climate history, geology, and biology. But to those drawn by legend, it is easy to wonder if more lies beneath. Perhaps remnants of a forgotten culture, perhaps even Atlantis itself. The pyramidal peaks, the unexplained anomalies, the strange accounts of explorers, all these are reminders that we see only the surface, while the true heart of Antarctica remains veiled. And so the continent becomes a mirror for our imagination. What we project onto it reflects our hopes and fears. A lost city, a hidden library, alien landscapes, or simply the last untouched wilderness of Earth. In truth, all these may be correct in their own way, for what is more alien than a rainforest once existing at the South Pole, or microbes surviving in lakes cut off from the sun for millions of years? What remains hidden still is not only physical but symbolic. Antarctica is the great unknown, the last frontier of Earth's secrets. And until the ice gives way, slowly, patiently, as it has for millions of years, its mysteries will remain sealed, waiting. Perhaps what lies beneath is only stone and water, or perhaps it is something far greater, a story older than we can imagine. Until we know, we can only dream. Some stories fade with time, growing faint until they are little more than curiosities in dusty books. But others remain, carried forward across centuries, retold in new voices, reshaped to fit new ages. The legend of Atlantis belongs to this second kind. For more than 2,000 years, it has refused to die. Instead, it continues to call to us, like a distant echo rising from beneath the waves. Part of this endurance lies in mystery. Plato gave us just enough detail to ignite imagination, but not enough to settle the matter once and for all. He described the location of Atlantis only vaguely, spoke of its wonders without proof, and left its destruction shrouded in divine judgment. The gaps in his account are wide, and into those gaps we pour our curiosity, our theories, and our dreams. Atlantis is a puzzle with missing pieces, and puzzles demand to be solved. Another reason the story persists is because it speaks to something deeply human, the rise and fall of civilizations. We know that empires are fragile, that greatness is temporary. The ruins of Rome, the fall of the Maya, the vanished cities of the Indus Valley, all remind us that no society is immune to time. Atlantis embodies this truth in symbolic form, a shining civilization undone by its own pride. it becomes a mirror, reflecting our hopes for greatness and our fears of collapse. But Atlantis is not only a warning, it is also a dream. For many, it represents the possibility that humanity once reached higher, that wisdom and knowledge existed long before the records of history. In this sense, Atlantis is not a tale of loss, but of promise, the promise that somewhere in our distant past lies a golden age, proof that we are capable of more than we think. Whether that age truly existed, or whether it is only a projection of our longing, matters less than the inspiration it provides. The legend has adapted across time. To Renaissance explorers, Atlantis was a lost world waiting to be rediscovered in the newly charted oceans. To mystics of the 19th century, it was a spiritual homeland where wisdom and energy were once pure. To modern dreamers, it has become a canvas for speculation about advanced technology, extraterrestrial contact, or civilizations buried beneath Antarctic ice. Atlantis survives because it is not fixed. It grows with us, reflecting our changing questions and desires. Perhaps this is the secret of its timeless pull. Atlantis is more than a place. It is an idea. It is the idea that mystery still exists, that the past is not fully known, and that hidden beneath the layers of time may lie truths capable of transforming how we see ourselves. In a world where so much has been mapped, catalogued, and explained, Atlantis reminds us that there are still wonders beyond our reach. And so the legend endures, as it has for thousands of years, inviting us to listen, to imagine, and to dream of what might still be waiting in the silence of the deep. From the time humans first gazed at the horizon, there has been a desire to ask what lies beyond. We have always searched for new lands, for hidden treasures, for truths buried in time. The legend of Atlantis is only one of many lost worlds that call to our imagination. But why do such stories captivate us so deeply? Why do we continue to dream of civilizations swallowed by sea or sand? Part of the answer lies in our longing for origin. Lost worlds speak to the possibility that our story began earlier or differently than we think. They suggest that humanity may have already achieved greatness once before, long before the written record. Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, Shambhala, all are names that hint at forgotten beginnings. To believe in them is to believe that our roots reach deeper than history, that we are connected to ages we cannot see. Another part comes from our yearning for wisdom. If a great civilization once existed and was lost, then perhaps it carried knowledge that could change us even now. Knowledge of nature, of the cosmos, of harmony between people and planet. The dream of Atlantis is not only about a city of marble and canals. It is about a wisdom that transcends time. In a world where progress often comes with cost, we imagine that a lost civilization might show us another way forward. There is also the simple thrill of mystery. The known world can feel small, crowded, and ordinary. But when we imagine lost worlds, we glimpse the extraordinary. The idea that beneath the sea or beneath the ice there might be ruins waiting to be uncovered fills us with the same wonder that once drove explorers across oceans. Mystery keeps the imagination alive, reminding us that discovery is still possible. Lost worlds also serve as mirrors. They reflect our fears and our hopes. When we hear of Atlantis destroyed by pride, we recognize our own potential for self-destruction. When we imagine a golden age of harmony, we recognize our longing for peace. These stories are never only about the past. They are also about us, here and now. They are ways of asking, what do we value? What do we risk? What will remain of us when our own age is gone? Finally, we search for lost worlds because they give us a sense of continuity. If civilizations rose and fell before us, then we are part of a larger cycle, one chapter in a much longer book. This can be humbling, but also comforting. It reminds us that we are not alone in time, that others have dreamed, built, thrived, and vanished before us, and that their stories, whether real or imagined, still flow through ours. Atlantis embodies all of this: mystery, wisdom, warning, and hope. To search for it is not only to look for ruins in ice or sea, but to seek something within ourselves, the part of us that longs to connect with the unknown, to learn from the past, and to carry those lessons into the future. Every generation has dreamed of discovery. For some, it was the chance to glimpse a new land across the ocean. For others, the thrill of peering through a telescope at distant stars. Discovery awakens something primal in us, the sense that there is always more beyond the horizon, more hidden beneath the surface, more waiting to be found. The legend of Atlantis thrives on this timeless impulse. It offers the promise that the greatest discovery of all may still lie ahead, a civilization not of the future, but of the past, preserved beneath the ice or sea. The dream of discovery is not only about treasure. True, the thought of golden temples, glittering orichalcum, and vast palaces excites the imagination. But what draws us even more is the idea of knowledge. What if Atlantis left behind archives of wisdom, maps of stars, or techniques for living in balance with nature? What if we could learn from them not just who they were, but also who we might become? This hope transforms Atlantis from a myth into a beacon, not simply a lost city, but a dream of rediscovery. Discovery also carries with it the thrill of the unexpected. Think of the explorers who first crossed unknown oceans, or the archaeologists who brushed away sand to reveal forgotten temples. Each moment of discovery changed the way humanity understood itself. If Atlantis were found, it would not be a small addition to our knowledge, but a transformation. Our history books would be rewritten. The boundaries of our story would expand. For this reason, the search itself becomes as alluring as the destination. And yet, the dream of discovery is not always literal. For many, Atlantis is discovered not in ruins or relics, but in the imagination. To sit quietly and picture shining cities rising from the sea, to wonder about civilizations erased by time, is itself a kind of journey. Each listener, each dreamer, makes their own Atlantis, a personal vision of what once was or what could have been. In this way, discovery becomes universal, not just for explorers or scientists, but for anyone who dares to imagine. At the same time, discovery is always bound with uncertainty. To find Atlantis would be to shatter the mystery. The unknown would become known, and in that moment, something might be lost. Perhaps this is why Atlantis has never been conclusively proven or disproven. The legend survives precisely because it has not yet been discovered. It remains suspended between possibility and impossibility, a dream that belongs equally to hope and to doubt. Still, the dream persists, somewhere beneath the ocean, or perhaps beneath the Antarctic ice. Something may be waiting, a city, a ruin, or simply the silence of stone. Whether or not Atlantis exists in physical form, the longing for discovery it inspires is real. It reminds us that we are still explorers, still seekers, still capable of wonder. And perhaps, in the end, that is Atlantis's true gift. Not the promise of gold or ruins, but the endless dream of discovery itself. There is a special kind of beauty in mystery, in the things we cannot fully know, the questions that remain unanswered. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, embodies this beauty. For over 2,000 years, it has lingered on the edge of our understanding, not proven, not disproven, a legend that resists resolution. And perhaps it is this very uncertainty that gives it its power. In a world where so much has been mapped, measured, and explained, mystery reminds us that the unknown still exists. We have explored the skies, split the atom, and catalogued the seas, yet stories like Atlantis tell us that the Earth still keeps secrets. The idea that something as vast as a lost civilization might lie just beyond our grasp is both humbling and inspiring. It invites us to slow down, to wonder, and to acknowledge that knowledge has limits. Mystery also awakens imagination. Without proof, we are free to picture Atlantis as we wish, a glittering island empire, a place of spiritual wisdom, a hub of advanced technology, or even a metaphor for human pride. Each interpretation is valid because no single image can claim to be the truth. In this way, Atlantis is not one story, but countless stories, each shaped by the person who dreams it. The beauty of mystery is that it allows every imagination to take part. There is also comfort in not knowing. If Atlantis were found tomorrow, with ruins, inscriptions, and artifacts laid bare, much of its wonder would be transformed into fact. We would study it, analyze it, debate its meaning, but the limitless possibility would vanish. As long as Atlantis remains hidden, it belongs to everyone, an endless canvas upon which we can paint our hopes and fears. Its uncertainty is what makes it timeless. In a sense, mystery itself is sacred. It reminds us that life is not meant to be entirely solved, that some truths are beyond our reach. Ancient cultures often embraced mystery as part of wisdom. The Egyptians spoke of hidden knowledge known only to the gods. The Vedic traditions of India taught that the deepest truths could not be spoken, only experienced. Atlantis, too, functions as a kind of sacred unknown, a reminder that even in our search for answers, the unanswered has its own value. The beauty of mystery also lies in its ability to unite. People across cultures and centuries have been drawn to Atlantis, each finding something of themselves in its legend. It is a shared dream, a common wonder, connecting us to one another through our longing to know more than we do. Mystery becomes not an obstacle, but a bridge. Perhaps, then, Atlantis's greatest gift is not in what it might reveal if found, but in what it gives us now, the joy of wondering, the thrill of imagining, and the quiet beauty of mystery itself. As the story of Atlantis drifts through time, we find that it reflects not only the past, but also ourselves. Each generation has looked into its legend like a mirror, seeing in it the hopes, fears, and questions of its own age. To Plato, it was a lesson about virtue and corruption. To explorers, it was a dream of discovery. To mystics, it was a source of hidden wisdom. And to us, perhaps, it is all these things at once, a reminder of what we seek and what we long to protect. Atlantis, in this way, is more than a city. It is a symbol of the fragility of human achievement. We know that civilizations rise and fall. We have seen it in the ruins of Mesopotamia, in the temples of the Maya, in the crumbled columns of Rome. The story of Atlantis tells us that no matter how great, no matter how advanced, no world is eternal. But it also reminds us that even when cities vanish, their stories endure. And stories, carried across time, are their own kind of immortality. When we dream of Atlantis, we also dream of ourselves, of what we might build, of what we might lose, and of how we might be remembered. We wonder if we, too, live in a golden age that one day will be only a memory. We wonder what future generations will say of us when they look back on the traces we leave behind. Atlantis becomes a reminder not just of what is lost, but of what we still have, the chance to live wisely, humbly, and in balance with the world. As you lie here now, listening, let the thought of Atlantis become less a puzzle to solve and more a gentle reminder. A reminder that mystery still exists. A reminder that the earth holds secrets too vast for us to measure. A reminder that wonder is not only in what we know, but in what we do not. Beneath the ice, beneath the seas, perhaps there are ruins. Perhaps there is only silence. But in your imagination, Atlantis can be anything you need it to be. A city of light, a library of wisdom, a sanctuary of peace. Let it rest there in your thoughts, not as something lost, but as something timeless. The story of Atlantis continues because it is not fixed. It flows like water, shaping itself to every listener. Tonight, it shapes itself for you, guiding you gently toward stillness. You do not need to solve its mystery. You do not need to decide if it was real. All you need is to let it carry you, like a vessel across calm waters, drifting slowly into the quiet beyond thought. And so, let Atlantis sink softly beneath the waves once more, not as a tragedy, but as a lullaby, a story that drifts with you into sleep, where the line between myth and dream disappears, and where you, too, can wander the shining halls of a lost world, safe and at peace.